Welcome to Concept Craft. We are presenting step-by-step videos training to crack your certification exam, so you can gain the confidence to take on any accounting challenge. Now let's begin our today's lesson. Using the Suggested Rules feature. Learning outcomes. In this lesson, we'll cover how the Suggested Rules feature in QuickBooks Online works, solving common client problems with suggested rules, category suggestions, and bank feeds. Topics: how suggested rules work, adding a suggested rule, when categorization suggestions aren't correct, troubleshooting errors, turning off suggestions and the suggested rules feature, create a rule to leave transactions as uncategorized, take the action out of transaction. Clients need to add bank feed data to transactions that are not yet entered in QuickBooks Online. This means categorizing and adding the data as the transactions go through the bank feed. Doing this manually can be a time-consuming chore. How can QuickBooks Online help? QuickBooks Online's Suggested Rules feature enables clients to streamline the task of reviewing, categorizing, and adding bank feed data. It does this by suggesting rules that QuickBooks Online can use to automatically categorize transactions of the same type. How suggested rules work. The Suggested Rules feature works by remembering how your client previously categorized a particular transaction when they added it from a bank feed. The feature recognizes when your client categorizes and adds a similar transaction the same way a second time. It then asks the client if they'd like QuickBooks Online to create a new rule that always assigns these types of transactions in the same way. Edit the rule to add extra conditions. Automatically add the categorized transactions to their books. However, as you'll find out later in the lesson, you need to take care when using the last feature. Adding a suggested rule. Let's look at a couple of expense transactions in the bank feed to see how the Suggested Rules feature works. In the Banking Center, select an expense. Select the vendor, or add a new vendor if required. In the Category dropdown, select a Fixed Assets category if a suitable category doesn't already exist. Create a new one. Then select Add to add the transaction because another transaction for the same vendor has a similar description to this one. QuickBooks Online offers to categorize both transactions to the same account. This appears in green in the Category or Match column. Select Add if other fields need to be populated. Select Elsewhere in the row to open the transaction. Then select Add. The Suggested Rules screen pops up, offering to create a rule with the same payee and account category if classes, locations, and/or tags are in use. The pop-up will also suggest that you enter a class/location/tag on this transaction. Note that there is a slider here to auto-add the transaction. It's better not to auto-add a transaction unless you set a maximum dollar amount. The Don't Show Me This Again link turns off the Suggested Rules feature. We'll cover this in more detail later. If you're happy with the rule, select Create Rule. To see what the rule looks like or to modify it before saving, select Edit Rule. In the Create Rule drawer, add a name to the rule. QuickBooks Online populates the other open fields. By default, it adds the transaction type and the bank account that the rule applies to. From here, there's an option to modify or add additional conditions, split the transaction, add a memo, and switch Auto Add on or off. Next, select Save. The new rule now appears in the Rules tab in the Banking Center. Use the Edit option from the Actions column to modify the rule again if necessary. When categorization suggestions aren't correct. Even though QuickBooks Online suggestions rules usually hit the mark, they aren't perfect. If you or your client aren't paying attention, you might not catch incorrect suggestions. What are the most common errors to watch out for? When Suggested Rules is set up to always apply a rule and auto-add a transaction, you might not have an opportunity to review and spot any potential problems. Another common issue is when clients are so busy trying to get their bank and credit card account balances correct that they don't pay close attention to the payee and category fields in a transaction. Here are two common situations where clients can run into problems when using bank feeds, including category suggestions and suggested rules. Select each heading to find out more. Uncategorized transactions. Same vendor, different purchases. Uncategorized transactions. What do this client's books tell you? In this example, when you look at the client's bank balances at month end, they are all correct. However, when you look at the profit and loss statement, you see significant sums in uncategorized income and uncategorized expense. When you examine these transactions, you can see that they were added through bank feeds. In addition, there are no payees on the transactions to help identify which accounts they should be posted to. What happened? For this transaction, the client recognized that the transaction was legitimate, so added it, but did not remember to add a payee and assign the transaction to the correct category, account. With no account assigned, QuickBooks Online posted the transaction to uncategorized income for money in and uncategorized expense for money out. Same vendor, different purchases. Take another example of a client who is a landscape gardener. They use a vendor called A-Rental to both rent and purchase equipment for their jobs. When the client rents equipment from A-Rental, the cost is typically less than $1,000. These transactions should be posted to equipment rental. Although the client rarely purchases equipment, these items are always $1,000 or more. These transactions should be posted to a tools and equipment, that is, fixed asset account. What happens next? The first transaction the client makes is for $850. It's for a rental, so they correctly identify the payee as A-Rental and the account as equipment rental. They then add the transaction. Then comes a second transaction for A-Rental. This time it's for a $5,500 equipment purchase. QuickBooks Online sees that the second transaction is for more than $1,000, but it suggests that the transaction also posts to equipment rental. The client unthinkingly accepts the suggestion and adds the transaction. Because it is the second transaction with the same payee and account, QuickBooks Online asks the client if they want to add a rule. Again, the client accepts the suggestion, so QuickBooks Online creates the rule and sets it to auto-add. Now all A-Rental transactions will automatically post to equipment rental. What do the client's books tell you? When you look at the client's profit and loss for the year, it shows an equipment rental expense of $6,350 total. Troubleshooting errors. How can you help your clients in these types of situations? Some basic tips are: review every transaction that QuickBooks Online automatically categorized. Decide whether the rules in question should be edited or deleted, and whether auto-add should be activated or not. How can your clients fix problems caused by automation errors? Your clients can easily fix these issues in the banking center. They just need to follow these steps. First, delete the rule that is causing the uncategorized income or expense transactions. If you don't delete the rule before undoing the categorization, QuickBooks Online will assign the rule to the same transactions again, even if you edit the rule and add a condition to refine which transactions it should be applied to. Then go into the Banking Center's Categorize tab for each account and undo the incorrect transactions from the offending rule to put them back into the For Review tab. Categorize each transaction properly and, if applicable, create new rules as you go. Alternatively, your client could use the Reclassify Transactions tool in Accountant Tools. To learn more about reclassifying transactions, visit our The Reclassify Transactions tool lesson. Turning off suggestions and the suggested rules feature. If your client is struggling with the suggestions and suggested rules features, they might prefer to switch them off completely. Select the headings to find out more. Turn off automatic category suggestions. Deactivate the suggested rules feature. Turn off automatic category suggestions. To turn off automatic category suggestions, in the For Review tab, select the grid gear icon and deselect the Enable Suggested Categorization checkbox. The next time a transaction generates, QuickBooks Online won't suggest a category or force your client to choose one. Deactivate the Suggested Rules feature. There are two places where you or your client can stop the Suggested Rules feature from appearing completely. When the suggested rule pop-up appears after your client records a second similar transaction, select Don't Show Me This Again to deactivate the Suggested Rules feature. This option ensures that no more rules are added by mistake. Alternatively, open the For Review tab in the Banking Center for a particular account. Then select the grid gear icon and simply uncheck the Show Suggested Rules checkbox. Create a rule to leave transactions as uncategorized. There are situations where it may be better to leave transactions uncategorized. For example, your client may work with a vendor from whom they purchase many different items that post to different accounts, such as office supplies, raw materials, or computer software. In such cases, they may want to tell QuickBooks Online that they never want a category suggestion for this particular vendor. They can do this by creating a rule to leave the transaction uncategorized. When they set up the rule, they should select Uncategorized Expense as the category and make sure Auto-Add is turned off. The client can then review each transaction and change the category to the correct account. How can you tell that a rule was applied to these transactions? Clients can't see a rule icon for these modified transactions on the For Review page, but if they select the transaction, they can see Rule Applied and the name of the rule, and it fills in the payee and uncategorized expense account in the transaction. Clients can also see that a rule was applied when they review the recategorized transaction in the Categorize tab after editing and adding it. Summing up. Learning outcomes. Well done. In this lesson, we covered how the Suggested Rules feature in QuickBooks Online works, solving common client problems with suggested rules, category suggestions, and bank feeds. Knowledge recap. You can now support your clients to create and manage suggested rules in QuickBooks Online. You can also help them troubleshoot and fix mistakes that the Suggested Rules feature might make. Next steps. In the next lesson, we'll cover importing and exporting bank rules.